Welcome to CGU Christ Grace Unlimited. My name is Trust in Christ, and today we're going to go to Second Kings chapter 8, where we left off of from chapter 6 and 7, where Elijah pretty much prophesied the death of the king of his time that sought his head. All right, so we're going to get into this lesson. We're not going to be before you super long, and we're going to start out right now. So the Shunammite land restored. Now, in this part of the lesson, in this story of Elisha, the men that got a double portion of the spirit of Elijah, you see that the woman that whose son he resurrected, he gives her fair warning of a famine that's going to come into the land of Israel that's going to happen for 7 years. And you see that take place starting right here. Then spake Elisha unto the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise, and go thou in thine household, and sojourn wheresoever thou canst sojourn. For the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years. So you can kind of look at this similar, and I think about it similar to Rahab, except the Shunammite woman that pretty much gave Elisha refuge and, food to eat, her and her husband, for a period of time. And God allowed this older woman to bear a child, and her child died. God pretty much gave her a way of escape during this period of time before the warning of the famine. You can look at this like the days of Noah, where God gave warning for about 120 years through the preaching of Noah in Genesis 6 or 7. Pretty much God gave this woman a way of escape because tribulation, and you can look at this as a parallel to the great tribulation that takes place in full scope within 7 years. This is kind of a similar time frame as this. And the woman arose, so she listened, and did after the saying of the man of God. And she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years, kind of like Lot. And just remember what was going on in this land. In the land of Israel, Israel was participating in idolatry. And the king that will follow, after the current king, and I think we're going to cover Jehoram, he was going to do and follow the sins of his father, of the kingdom of Israel. You have Ahab's side, which is Israel, the 10 tribes. And then you have, the side where, Judah is reigning. I have to look again of who was reigning at that time. All right. And the woman arose and did after the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. So she got out of there. And it came to pass at the 7 years end that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines, and she went forth to cry unto the king for her house and for her land. Because remember, she left the land and pretty much, she survived. She didn't starve to death. And when she came back, she wanted her land and her possession returned. All right. And the king talked to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha hath done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored a dead body to life, that, behold, a woman whose son had he restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed her a certain officer, saying, Restore all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field since the day that she had left the land, even until now. And Elijah came to Damascus, and remember that's a 7-year period that has passed. And Benadad, the king of Syria was sick. And it was told him, saying, The man of God is come hither. And the king said unto Hazael, Take a present in thine hand, and go, meet the man of God, and inquire of the Lord by him, saying, Shall I recover of this disease? So Hazael went to meet him and took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels of burden, and came and stood before him and said, Thy son Benadad, king of Syria, hath sent me to thee, saying, Shall I recover of this disease? And Elisha said unto him, Go and say unto him, Thou mayest certainly recover, howbeit the Lord hath shown me that he shall surely die. So pretty much he's going to recover and then die. And he settled his countenance steadfastly until he was ashamed, so he couldn't hide it, because that's big news. The current king, he's going to die. And the man of God wept. And Hazael said, Why weepeth my Lord? And he answered, Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel. Their strongholds wilt thou set on fire, and their young men wilt thou slay with the sword, and wilt dash their children, and rip up their women with child. And Hazael said, But what? Is thy servant a dog, that he should do this great thing? And Elijah answered, The Lord hath showed me that thou shalt be king over Syria. So you're going to be king, Hazael. So he's going to be king over the 10. So he departed from Elisha and came to his master, who said to him, What said Elisha to thee? And he answered, He told me that thou shouldest surely recover. And it came to pass on the morrow that he took a thick cloth and dipped it in water and spread it on his face, so that he died, and Hazael reigned in his stead. So he was restored, and then he died. And in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being the king of Judah, Jehoram the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years old was he when he began to reign. And he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab. So pretty much he did evil in the sight of the Lord. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife. So pretty much he had a harlot, adulteress. And when I'm talking about adulteress, I mean idolatry. I can't pronounce the word at the moment. Idolatrous wife. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Thank you. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David's, his servant's sake, as he was promised to give him always a light unto his children. And isn't that quite interesting? God allowed, for Judah's sake, not to wipe them out. And you see, a difference between how, Israel and Judah, how the treatment is a little bit different, where the lineage of the seed of Christ is promised. Yes, God persecutes them and, draws them back to, him. But that lineage is not wiped out, unlike Ahab's lineage is promised to be wiped out, or Jeroboam's lineage is, wiped out, because of their sin. But because of promise sake, just like with Israel's sake, they survived not because of their righteousness, but because of promise that God made. But yet and still you will see God judge and, pretty much give them under judgment. And just think about, they're in famine, they're going through many wars. And one thing the people need to understand, Why are we going through so much war, famine? You know, but why didn't we go through that much during, Solomon's time? Because pretty much Solomon's time was, a kingdom of peace, but pretty much after that, they had little peace and almost constant war in the land of Israel. Could it be God? And you can say the same thing, with us today. I remember when the Connecticut, shootouts happened and the schools happened. And a lot of Christians said if God was in the schools, this stuff wouldn't happen. And a lot of your atheists, a lot of your non-believers, and a lot of your Christians, said, well, no, we're not saying that this wouldn't happen. Well, I'll say it like this. If, we served God and loved God, these things would be rapidly decreased. It wouldn't be growing and growing and growing because God would be at the forefront and evil would be trodden down upon quite, easy. And that's the same thing, with these kings, with Judah, with Israel, with all the leadership, because they took a neutral stance. It doesn't mean that they were harsh and, that they were harsh kings and not kind, but because they allowed idolatry, because this is the key thing, because they did not love the Lord their God with their all, and they gave credence to other idol gods and other religions and other practices, allowed sacrifice to happen within the land, God gave judgment. God split the kingdom in two. God allowed famine to enter into the land. God allowed Israel to be without peace for so long. But for the most part, most of your kings never really turned to God. It was only a few. You see very few. Josiah, Asa, and a few others. And some did halfway right, and some just didn't care, like the famous Ahab and Jezebel. So pretty much he took Ahab, who is pretty much one of the most wicked, during his time. And it gets worse with Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, which happens later on. He gets a wicked wife. So that influence, if a woman can influence, and I'll say it like this, Solomon, the wisest man in history, the richest man in history, to, do idolatry, imagine what a woman can do to this man. So women are very important. And this wife is going to steer him down a dark path, as we're going to see. All right. Yet the Lord will not destroy Judah for David his servant's sake, as he promised him to give him always a light and to his children. In his days, Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. So did they have it good? They weren't utterly destroyed, Judah, but they were in constant war still. So Joram went over to Zaire and all the chariots with them, and he arose by night and smote the Edomites which compassed him about. And the captains of the chariots and the people fled into their tents. Yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah unto this day. And then Lebanon revolted at the same time. So, did they have peace? No, they were in constant war, and it's because simply their sin, their idolatry, their lack of love towards God, where what is one of the first commandments, the first four? Love the Lord your God with your all. Don't have any idols before him. Thou shalt not make any graven image, things of the land, sea, or things that are above in heaven. Those things and other gods they worshipped within Israel, and they sacrificed, which was forbidden in the commandments of God, the 10 commandments and the law of Moses, all the 316 laws. They did not regard it because, again, kings were supposed to meditate day and night in the laws of God, because the word of the king, the word of, the leader, it means something. And to prove it real quick, we all know that there was a great uptick of homosexuality within America when Obama and under, and Joe Biden said love is love. That opened up a great doorway because the king's word has a lot of power. Same thing with Trump, same thing with Biden, same thing with any leader, same thing with your household. What you're raised under influences who is under you. It only takes God to break that, but what you say, the king, the leader, it matters. And all of Israel, not everybody, was following the king's leadership. So God, just like the word said, he sent his prophets. All right, verse 23, we're almost done. And the rest of the acts of Joram, and excuse me, I think I went too far. No, I did. And the rest of the acts of Joram and all that he did, are they not written in the books of the chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Joram slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Ahaziah, his son, reigned in his stead. And Ahaziah, he does worse. And in the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, the king of Israel, did Ahaziah, the son of Jeroboam, king of Judah, begin to reign. And 20 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign. And he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, so he didn't last that long. And his mother name was Abataliah, the daughter of Omari, king of Israel. And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab, and did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab. So this is Judah doing bad too. And for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And he went to Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against, Ahazazel, the king of Syria, and Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians wounded Joram, and King Joram went back to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him at Ramah. When he fought against Hazael, king of Syria, and Ahaziah, the son of Jeroboam, king of Judah, went down to see Jeroboam, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel because he was sick. So we're going to end on that note. And to be very brief, because we're not going to be long today, one thing you have to see, who you marry is very important. One thing you see both the lineage, where Asa, he was, king over Israel, he tore down all the idols after he had a wicked family. And not only that, his mom was doing a little bit of idolatry, and once he found that out, he tore down her idols. Then shortly thereafter, these kings did halfway right. You know, Asa, he was just too mean. He was too wicked. He was too zealous of the Lord. He got rid of all the idols. Let me still show some vigor for the Lord, but allow a little sacrifice happen in the high places. So, next king did halfway right. King after that went wrong, and then guess what? They merged within, a wicked tribe. Took the daughter of a pagan worshiper, and yes, Ahab did repent and he was humbled by God, but his influence that happened for years upon years within Israel, because a lot of us, when we look at the Bible, and you heard me say this many times, we look at it as action packed and this happening all at once. But Ahab lived a life. He taught things to his children. His wife, Jezebel, she influenced her children. They learned the ways of Jezebel. They looked at, that way as a righteous way. Same thing today. The cultures of today, you know, the cultures of today, they see no harm with Satanism. It's just a hobby. It's just a pastime. Where in the past, if you go back 30, 40 years, if you were a Satanist, you had to keep that in the darkness. You had to do that, hidden, because you would be shamed. But today, where idolatry and paganism and sacrifice is just looked at as culture, and it is. It's culture. Culture. Guess what? Your children, yeah, you have your Judeo-Christian, roots of your parents, and you thought they were so mean. You thought that they were, being too strict upon you. You didn't like going to church. Sunday, Friday, and yeah, it might have been to very extremes. But guess what? You hold on to some of those things, but your children, will they have that morality of God instilled into them like you were? No, because you didn't instill it into them like your parents instilled it into you. It always gets worse unless God steps in. And one last thing before I allow the group members to speak. You see how God looked out for this woman that gave the prophet refuge. And it reminds me of Rahab. When she did right to the Lord, what did God do? He gave her a way of escape. And same with us. We have an escape from the wrath of God because of Christ Jesus. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, whosoever believeth in him will not perish, will have everlasting life. So your escape, your way of having peace with God is through Christ. Because, once your time comes, there is no repentance. For it is appointed once for a man to die, and then there's judgment. So we're going to end on that note. So, does anybody have any comments or statements before we close this thing up? Take your time.
Yeah.
Go ahead, artist.
I guess this kind of just pretty much shows how important it is, that we think about when it comes to our leaders and what they believe and what they support. Because a lot of people may look at the sort of physical benefits a presidential leader or whoever may give us, but then when it comes to religious and spiritual differences, it's like the excuse that's given is just, oh, well, you're not going to always agree with the candidate, or you're not always going to, not everybody believes the same. And yeah, sure. But we often don't, people don't often think about how that can affect, the country spiritually and go more into, spirit and go into more physical problems. Like the situation, a lot of teens being depressed and, acting out, and people, dying as a result. That mainly stemmed from spiritual issues that crossed over into, their physical actions and their mental and such.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, who gets you the most money, your paycheck, or who lowers, medical prices. It's much more greater than that.
Yeah. One thing I want to say this, and it's kind of messed up. Elijah, he prophesied to, the future king of Israel that he was going to become king. And he told him that pretty much evil would happen to Israel. And he was like, okay, the king is going to be restored and then he's going to die. What he do next? He kills the king. Like, this dude, straight up savage. Like, my goodness. Ahaziel, my goodness. He brought suffering to the king. I mean, he brought suffering to the kingdom. You know, right when he became king. It's just kind of interesting. He later on died. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say he killed the king, but the king died and he just took the reins. Um, Anybody else?
Well, I definitely got something to add, but
Okay,
I'll
bro.
wait.
I don't think
Someone else
anyone.
has anything to say?
I don't think
All right.
anybody else is gonna say anything.
Uh, I got some notes that now I got a chronological study Bible, but I think just because I know I'm the history buff, I think I'll probably set that to the side and just use the few notes I got. So, um, So first off, this is just, because sometimes you have stuff in the Bible that's mentioned and it's kind of, you're like, what does that mean, right? Because, we just kind of lose the context. So in verse 30 in chapter 9, where, Jehu, who comes to Jezreel, and then, you know, he's Jezebel's there, and she's, essentially what she's doing is basically she's kind of getting dolled up. Like what she did, which was a kind of a normal custom that went all the way back to Job's day, is basically it was literally you would dip your paint and you would dip your eyes in paint, right? And so it's like you're kind of getting dolled up, and then, when it talks about her head being tiered, it's like she was actually adorning her head with like, I don't know if it needs to be a crown or tiara or something like that, but probably had her royal like robes on or dress or something. So basically she was kind of getting dolled up, and then she was kind of presenting herself out of the window, right? Because she wanted to be seen. And of course Jehu recognizes her, right? And she was probably thinking like, hey, let me doll myself up so he can see who I am, so we can kind of negotiate or something. But in reality, that just helped Jehu immediately identify Jezebel. And because he knows, because it was prophesied, like he's going to be the one to destroy the entire house of Ahab, he's like, well, oh, there's the matriarch of the family. Let me go ahead and get rid of her, right? So not only does the men listen to his orders, she gets thrown out the window, but it's kind of suggested that basically, essentially after she probably, fell to her death or was close to it, basically his chariot essentially trampled on her, right? Afterwards. That's why it talks about there being blood on the walls and on the hoofs of the horses, right? So it's pretty gruesome. But then, of course, and this is verse 34 and 37, the same chapter, Jezebel has an exceptionally grim and gruesome death, right? They go back and all you have is basically her skull in the palms of her hand. And it's suggested that basically wild dogs consumed her. But the commentary in this Bible I was looking at, he says basically those that reject Christ are given an ignoble end, and to die without God is death of eternal darkness, right? So you kind of see like, those, especially in the case of someone like Jezebel, right? When it's like you're sinning and you're doing an absolute knowledge and you don't care, like God eventually, hold on one second. All right, sorry about that. But yeah, like essentially what he's saying is in the commentary, like those, like when you reject Christ with like absolute knowledge and like you doing it like with no repentance, like you're gonna face like an exceptionally grim and gruesome reckoning. But some other things. So King Jehoram, right? He was married to Athaliah, which was in the house of Ahab, and that in particular, like that is essentially what, like that royal union, right, between those two and like the two kingdoms, like that is what kind of introduced a worship of Baal into
Judah.
Jehoram's life and kingdom. Another thing is 2 Kings 8, like the beginning of the chapter, we kind of see with Elijah when it talks about like the famine, for example, right? You kind of see like with Elijah, right? It was 3.5, and with Elisha, it's double that. So you kind of see like there's a double portion given to Elijah, but also too, I would say that I think on a personal level, like as a believer, like you have to kind of think like whatever God gives you, right? It's like not only can you have a double blessing or portion, but like the judgment you face can be even more severe, right? So like for example, like you think of somebody who's in leadership or ministry or part of a big church, right? It's like when those people sin and they stumble, right? Like I mean they crash and burn. Like it's a pretty big extravagant thing. And so I would say, to those out there listening, like whatever God gives you, whatever he blesses you with, like you best be exceedingly careful what you do with those gifts, because if you misuse them, like the judgment you're going to face is going to be exceptionally severe, right? That's just kind of my interpretation there. What else? So 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 7, We kind of see the prophet Elijah has like great respect even from like, heathen kings, in this case talking about Syria. One thing to note, 2 Kings 8:15, when Hazael, when he murdered Ben-Hadad, it talks about that he took a thick cloth and dipped it in water and spread it on his face. This is just me because I couldn't find it in my commentary books, but I'm thinking since he was probably feeble and weak from being sick, I'm thinking maybe with him taking such a thick cloth and soaking it in water, right? Him kind of putting that over his face, he's basically like suffocating or asphyxiating like King Benedct, right? So like it's kind of a brutal way to go out, but I think that's like if you're kind of wondering like, well, how can you kill somebody with a thick cloth full of waters? Because he probably couldn't breathe, right? And so obviously he just died from being suffocated. But then you have 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 18. You have Jehoshaphat, his sin being addressed, his marriage into the family of Ahab. 2 Kings 9:1. We see that Jehu, right? He's used as God's divine instrument, right, to punish Ahab's family and his entire lineage. But we kind of see that he himself is not a holy man, right? Like in the commentary, it talks about how like he utterly destroyed Baal and worship and idols, but he still permitted the golden calves to remain, right? So you can kind of see like sometimes even when there's not an actual righteous man to kind of be a divine instrument of judgment or punishment upon like a people or a nation, like God will get an evil or wicked person or a carnal or heathen king or nation to do the judgment for them. And we clearly see, like, obviously with, the book we're in now, like God will use heathen nations to judge Israel when they're in sin and they're unrepentant. Then I think I got, no, that was it. So just a few things I was writing down as you were talking.
Yep, I do like that last point. How God can use the wicked to slay the wicked.
Oh, one more thing is we kind of see like the chaos of like, I mean it really started with King Solomon, but like, when you look at what happens when Israel's divided into two separate kingdoms, right? You kind of see like, one king, like in Ahab's case, he has the idolatrous Jezebel, and it's like you kind of see like there's always one king is being exchanged for another, right? Relatively quickly, and there's all this chaos and discord, and it's like in contrast, like when you look at Jesus, right? Like in the millennial reign, right? He is king upon the earth, but his reign is eternal, right? So we kind of see like with like mankind, like ideally if a
All right, thanks. That was great. Yeah, that was great.
I guess I got kicked out.
Well,
Yeah,
Never mind.
that was random.
Yeah.
Before you talk,
I'll just go ahead and stop. I don't know where I left off.
but, to piggyback.
How did
hold on,
that happen?
All right, forget that. But to piggyback off of Hellscreen's point,
Sorry.
no, y'all good. Scripture's clear. So a lot of people, they have this idea that the good, that, and it's kind of dealing with today, that pretty much when the wicked falls down, it will be a righteous man. That's not the truth all the time. Sometimes he does, but at times you see that God, just like he did with Solomon, he rose up an adversary, amongst him. And the same thing in this case, he used, wicked people to judge Israel. And you also see this principle, in Revelation. And this principle, you see it in Psalms 34:21. Evil shall slay the wicked, and they that hate the righteous shall be desolate. The Lord redeemeth the soul of his servants, and none of them that trust in him shall be desolate. So just, I just wanted to add that on to piggyback on this point. So it is biblical. If you think that, say for instance, because we got a lot of woke people today, when someone is exposing the Illuminati, whatever it is, I don't care. Uh, and they have Luciferian, ties, or they're a New Ager, or they have Jesuit ties connected to the Catholic Church, but they do stuff on Fox News. Just so you know, just because someone is exposing evil or bringing an end to a wicked reign does not mean they're of God. And that's very important to understand, because Jehu, still wasn't looked upon as righteous. We'll get to that, when we get to his reign. And you see that with the kings, what made them good and righteous was their love towards God. Because remember, the test of a prophet, it had to deal with if the false prophet gets the prophecy correct, but tries to turn you away from God, kill him. This is a test of your love. Are you going to allow, someone that tells you to go away from me, are you going to allow them to reign in my land? And quite often, when things became so immorally corrupt, that stuff happened. Wicked rulers raised up, and then God will raise someone outside of Israel and within Israel to put a stop to it. That was also wicked, or halfway good, which is still wicked. Just wanted to add that on. Anybody else? Okay. Is Vessel here?
Nah.
Okay.
I got one little thing I could add real quick.
Okay.
So if I don't drop out, so this is 921. I thought this was really cool when it talks about Joram said, "Make ready," and his chariot was made ready, and Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out and each his chariot, and they went out against Jehu and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. This is from the Expositor Study Bible. I thought this was pretty cool. It says, divine providence had so ordered matters that vengeance for sin of Ahab was exacted upon the very sin of his guilt regarding Naboth. The mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. In other words, the Lord misses nothing.
Yep.
So when the Lord has determined he's going to exact vengeance upon someone, like, you best believe he is going to collect everything that he is due.
Scary.
So I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Can't get away from God's judgment and wrath, and it don't have to be a
Mhm.
righteous person. He uses whoever he wants.
Yeah.
Yep, and that
That's
goes
all.
to them Christians. God can't use you if you're an unclean vessel. Oh, yes, he can. He can use dirty people.
Scary.
He can
That's
use
scary.
dirty people to do righteous, and he can use dirty people to do judgment. God can do whatever he wants. Stop making up stuff in scripture. Now, you want to be a willing vessel of purity for God, but God can use whoever he wants. He even uses Satan. It's just what we see. All right, but let me make something clear. Satan is still Satan. He's trash. He sucks, and he will burn in hell. All right. Is Vessel here?
No.
Okay, I'll close it out. The CGU is brought to you by the Bible.
The Bible.
Bible.
The Bible.
All right, God bless you guys.